Hello, everybody. It is Thursday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined for our weekly Penn State football podcast by Joel Haas of the Daily Collegian and the Post-Gazette. Talking after an exciting Penn State win against West Virginia on Saturday. Obviously, it's been a few days, so we're going to try to spin what we saw that day forward a little bit, talk about what it could mean for Penn State in the days, weeks ahead. Also going to get into some big picture stuff as we've gotten some results from around college football that are pretty interesting. Before we do, just want to thank our sponsor. It's Voodoo Brewing Company in State College. Enjoy world-renowned craft beer, delicious cocktails, and our almost famous lobster rolls at Voodoo Brewing State College Pub, located right off College Avenue and Route 322 at 201 Elmwood Street, State College. VBC has something exciting going on every day of the week. Join us this fall on Mondays for weekly free play cornhole tournaments or test your knowledge with Prep Trivia every Tuesday at 6. Wednesday is our game night featuring board games, card games, and adult games. Every Thursday, your boy Dots hosts bingo, but this is not your Nana's bingo. Saturday, we have your Nittany Lions and college football on all day. We finish off Sundays with our weekly brunch paired with Steelers, Eagles, and Red Zone coverage. We can't wait to see you all at the VBC State College Pub. Obviously, the NFL actually starting this week, so that part of the read will finally be true. Joel, let's get into this big Penn State win, and I think the headline was how explosive they looked. All of the big plays, that led to touchdowns, that led to just big plays for the sake of them. Something we didn't see much from this offense last year. How sustainable do you think that this is? Because Penn State romped over West Virginia at home last year. There were some big plays in that game. I think a lot of people got excited about the potential of the team. And then in the big moments, against the teams that mattered, they ended up wilting. I'll weigh in first. I think it is more sustainable because I can remember 4 or 5 occasions where Joel Klatt was isolating one defender and pointing out how Andy Kotelnicki's offense was able to kind of force that guy into conflict and make a decision, and then the offense could react to it. I think of the Katron Allen touchdown specifically where they isolated the linebacker. If he blitzed, he was going to throw to Katron Allen. If he didn't, there was going to be a running lane available. As long as they're doing that type of stuff, Joel, I don't see why that can't persist, deep into the season and against some of the tougher teams they're going to face.
Yeah, for sure. I have to agree with you there. I tend to think that they'll be able to sustain this throughout the year. You referenced it. They were pretty successful against West Virginia last year as well. And then we kind of saw what happened throughout the season, especially as they got into bigger games. But I do think the biggest difference between this year and last year does lie in Kotelnicki's scheme, because those explosive plays were not dependent on players like winning one-on-ones for the most part. There was the Omari Evans, which you could argue was an offensive pass interference, but West Virginia got some calls too. But for the most part, the explosive plays again felt like they were more related to scheme. It felt like it was guys finding these open pockets in the defense, or making defenders have to kind of make a decision who they're going to guard, and then kind of exploiting that. It wasn't just like let's toss it up one-on-one and see if our guy can make a play. So you look at West Virginia's defense, and it's not. It's not the strongest defense. It's definitely not one of the tougher defenses Penn State will face this year. But again, it's not about, kind of beating your man one-on-one. It's about scheming your players open, which, scheme kind of works against any opponent. It's not just about, are your receivers better than their cornerbacks? Because, in this case, yes, because I think West Virginia's secondary is probably the weakest unit on the team. And so, it's a little bit hard to gauge based on that. But again,
but it wasn't just corners. You know what I mean? It wasn't just guys in the secondary. It was linebackers and some of those matchups as well that they were finding ways to exploit. So yeah, I certainly, that's what I saw. I can think of 4 or 5 plays. What I've noticed in social media these days is some guy will isolate one play and be like, this guy is a genius. And I think we saw some of that with Mike Yurcich, where you'd see a clip that would go viral on Twitter once a week. Right. And say, wow, what a brilliant play call. And then the other, 59 minutes of the game, what happened? I think you saw 4, 5, 6 examples of that you can isolate from Saturday. And that's, I think my question is, can you do that against the better teams? Because, what you're referencing is I think we saw last year the Penn State could win one-on-one with a lot of the teams on their schedule. And I think that's kind of been the glass ceiling they've run into, right? Is, that they could rely on winning one-on-one matchups against less athletic teams. And then when they were not the more athletic team, things would falter. But those unless those teams are really well prepared when they face Penn State, those gaps should be there even against better teams, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there should be a little bit of a difference there. I mean, when you're going against super talented players, there's going to be, fewer missed tackles. They might just be kind of better at reading the offense and things like that. But
And
at the end of the day,
the gaps are going to close more quickly and things like
right.
that. Maybe you're not going to be able to, maybe a 20-yard run is a 10-yard run, but you're still in theory going to have those gaps.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's not, some genius analysis to say that, Ohio State's going to have a better defense than West Virginia and Penn State's not going to be as explosive against them. But again, I do still think that they're able to find that explosiveness. I think they'll be able to get guys open, which I think is really exciting if you're a Penn State fan. I mean, that's something that you probably haven't had for a long time. Maybe even going back to like the Trace McSorley, Saquon Barkley type days. I think that's kind of what you're looking at if you're Penn State. And then, on the defensive side of the ball, they also looked great, which has, kind of been expected in recent years. But if they can maintain kind of the defense they had last year and then continue to create these explosive plays on offense, Penn State, could really make a push here and challenge. I don't want to say, national championship level yet, but I really do think they could be one of those top 5-ish teams in the country this year.
It's funny because when you think back of those 2016, 17, 18, even 19 teams I'll throw in there, all those pre-pandemic teams Penn State had that were really good. The year that they beat Ohio State was 24-17, a tightly played game throughout. And then the games that they lost, they made a lot of explosive plays. And you think of, the KJ Hamler run-in touchdown. You think of the running gun game against Ohio State in the shoe. I think, what was that? That was 2019. And that's what we haven't seen post-pandemic from Penn State. And I think that they got really lucky that night in 2016. And I think they got really unlucky those subsequent 3 games against Ohio State. I think if you're playing games like that against Ohio State more consistently, if you're Penn State, you have a better chance to come out with a victory if you make a couple more plays than you did in those games, than kind of using that 2016 model of saying, let's just be the team that makes the fewest mistakes and win on a big play at the end. It's kind of an oxymoron because they lost all 3 of those games and then they won the one in 2016. But I actually think those other 3 are the template for what you want to see from Penn State against a team like Ohio State.
Yeah, and I mean that's a good benchmark test, right? Because they play Ohio State every year, and you can kind of track their progress. You can track kind of the scores of those matchups to kind of see. And Ohio State, for the most part, over the last decade or so, has been an elite program, kind of in that like 11-1, 12-0 range. So Ohio State's been pretty stable. Penn State kind of fluctuates a little bit more. And so it's kind of good to measure up against Ohio State every year as a, kind of a true test of how Penn State will perform against an elite opponent. So definitely a really big matchup coming up, and Penn State gets that one at home. I think it'll be a lot closer than maybe I initially thought when the schedule was released. So.
We talked a little bit about the receivers. Obviously, Trey Wallace had his kind of breakout game. Again, I think looking forward, the question is, how different is this than last year when Keandre Lambert-Smith had a big game and ended up, for lack of a better term, turning into a pumpkin and just, sitting on the bench and not being a factor for most of the last third of the season. What do you think that you saw from Trey Wallace that you think is different from him as a number 1 guy?
Like compared to his performance last year, you mean?
I'd say maybe more compared to Keandre Lambert-Smith.
Yeah. I think in some ways they're pretty similar. More of the speedster kind of explosive playability, which is obviously what you want from your top receiver. But I didn't see any type of kind of the issues that I would say plagued Keandre Lambert-Smith were mainly just route running. We saw a lot of times where he was just running the wrong route. And I think the coaches didn't like that. So there were times where, he wasn't getting targeted a lot. I think they kind of stayed away from him at times because they were maybe worried about, whether or not he would make a costly mistake there with the route running potentially leading to some kind of interception or something like that. I think the coaching staff trusts Harrison Wallace a little bit more. I don't think they're going to shy away from him in big moments, which I think is a big difference. I mean, you want your wide receiver 1 to, be a guy that you can trust, your go-to guy in a big, 3rd and long situation or in those big games against, USC, Ohio State down the line. you want to be able to trust him. And I think Harrison Wallace has I mean, it's still early, but looked very good in this game. And pretty much every time we've seen him has fully healthy. He's looked solid, looked consistent, and definitely looked like he did take a bit of a step forward entering this game. He also had a big game against West Virginia last year. I think he had 7 catches, which still sits as his career high. 5 this time around, but more yardage, so a bit more explosive this year. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is just kind of more of that consistency from Harrison Wallace, I would say.
Another guy who had a huge game this year as well as last year was Drew Allar. We've talked a lot in the offseason about what can be different, what needs to be different. I think I saw more confidence from him. I think I saw more of an involvement in all facets of the game. I thought of the one option play. I was like, man, I don't know. I don't know who would have pulled that play call with him last year, even though we know Drew Allar, can move pretty well with the ball. That showed to me a commitment to the scheme, Joel. And that, I mean, this guy could be a first round NFL draft pick if he plays his cards right. He's got the physical tools. So I just found it interesting to see him running full blown option plays, in that context, because I don't think you see a lot of guys with that kind of pedigree making those types of plays. Are you getting the read that he's just more integrated into this offense this year and has an ability to kind of run with it in a way that he didn't a year ago, even though he had a big game against West Virginia this year and the year before?
Yeah, I think a couple things play into that. I mean, going back to Kotelnicki's scheme, I think he wants to get these guys involved in different ways, do some very creative things, which we definitely saw. I mean, we saw Allar lined up out wide with Bo under center. We saw a bunch of kind of different things. We saw, I think Nick Singleton was in Wildcat, but then they got flagged for some pre-snap penalty before that. So we didn't really see kind of what that play developed into. We saw even Anthony Donko, the right tackle, go in motion pre-snap, which was really interesting. We saw a lot of really creative things. And so, yeah, I think part of it just has to do with the scheme. I think getting Allar to use his legs a little bit more. And then on the flip side, I think getting Bo to actually show off the arm a little bit more. I think those are both big things because last year you knew, when Bo comes into the game, he's going to run, whatever 95% of the time. I think this year they're going to try to be a little bit more versatile for both of their quarterbacks, kind of use them in different ways. And then part of it is just on Drew. I think we heard that he lost 10 pounds and was worried about kind of more just getting leaner over the offseason, kind of focusing on that. We've heard that that's helped him in terms of speed and just mobility, even just footwork in the pocket and things like that. So I think it's kind of a combination of those two things.
One thing that I did stand out, especially in that first quarter, was, I mean, it was a little sloppy at times, Joel, and as great as some of those things looked on film, and you can pull out 5-6 plays and say, I mean, this is genius stuff. There were also plays where they were just busted, and it looked like there was bad communication, or guys didn't necessarily know where they were going. You had the fumble early on. How much time do you think it's going to take for them to polish this thing up a little bit? Because part of being creative is things are a little more complicated than just getting to the line and running conventional plays and just trying to do them better than other teams. Are we going to see, some brain farts here for a while? And is that a concern as you get in later to the season, that this is a complex offense that Penn State is in the first year of running?
I honestly don't think that it'll be that big of an issue. For a few reasons. I think you kind of look at the mistakes that they were making. One of them, that fumble on the first drive, was actually Allar and Franklin both mentioned after the game. The safety had clapped, which threw off the offensive line. Allar said the whole offensive line kind of reacted to the safety clapping. He wasn't ready, and Nick Dawkins snaps the ball, it hits him in the leg. And then you look at kind of some of the other mistakes that the team was making, maybe some of those penalties. I look at Abdul Carter, who had two offsides penalties on Abdul Carter. And I think that's something that you can fix because it was still his first game starting at defensive end after transitioning from linebacker. I think he was trying to time up the snaps there and just got caught a couple of times. But I think that's something that's pretty easy to coach, easy to fix. So I think those mistakes that happened were, again, like you don't like to see that from Penn State. Obviously, it is a little bit sloppy. If you're kind of nitpicking, I mean, a great overall game, but those are kind of the biggest issues. Franklin said the same thing. He was asked, if he had to nitpick, what kind of things would he want to fix, and he mentioned, turnovers, penalties. So yeah, I mean, definitely something that Penn State will probably work on. But again, I think those are easy fixes. I don't think those are things that are going to plague the team. Going back to what you said about kind of the offensive side and just the creativity, I do think there is a chance that it causes some issues, causes kind of some confusion. But we have heard from the players that the offense has been simplified by Kotelnicki. It's essentially the opposite of what you had with Mike Yurcich, where the plays are very simple to understand for the offense, but look complex to the defense. Whereas I feel like under Yurcich, a lot of times it was the offense that was getting confused on these plays, on these play calls, and they didn't even end up, being anything too crazy. And it didn't seem to be fooling the defense. It seemed to be kind of fooling the offense more than anything. And I think this year you have kind of the opposite, where Kotelnicki's done a great job of getting guys in a position where they can understand the playbook, and then they can add and implement, little tweaks here and there, little wrinkles to kind of shake things up and add those extra elements. But I do think it seemed, for the most part, like they kind of had the offense down. So yeah, again, I going back to your original question, I don't think it'll be too much of an issue. I don't really think you'll see, this type of stuff carrying on. And even if it does for a little bit, Penn State, if you have any kinks to work out, this is the time to do it with Bowling Green, Kent State, Illinois, all at home. So, if you are going to make mistakes, this is the time to do it. This is the time to kind of experiment and then, figure those issues out before the schedule gets tough.
Yeah, I was just about to say the exact same thing. Is the way the schedule shapes up is allows them to kind of, I think, master their craft here a little bit with this offense and do some things in practice in stadium that you can just never do in the summer, in the spring, that type of stuff. So will be interesting. That's certainly something I'll be keeping an eye on against Bowling Green this week. I think another thing that stood out to me, Joel, was the success of the secondary broadly. I thought Kevin Winston Jr. obviously got some awards this week for his performance. Jaylen Reed drew a lot of praise from James Franklin. He was all over the field early on. But even those transfer corners, Jalen Kimber, AJ Harris made some plays. Is this group shaping up to be potentially a real strength of the team that maybe we, entered the season with some questions about? Or do you look at, the gap in athleticism with West Virginia and say these guys are still going to have to prove it against, more quality opponents, like they did not in the Peach Bowl?
Yeah. No, I do really think this could be a big strength for the team. I think what they've been able to do with the line position was really helpful. I thought Jaylen Reed kind of excelled in that role. I think it almost elevated his game. Just kind of moving around the field, it felt like he was everywhere, especially in that first half. Kevin Winston had a great game as well. We've heard some hype about him over the offseason, and obviously the awards that he was able to bring in, Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week after the game, and everything like that. Obviously a great performance from him. I think having those 5 defensive backs out there really helps and almost gives those guys kind of a sense of security. I think they play really well with each other. We heard about some of the stuff they were doing in the offseason. A group of those guys, of those defensive backs, went to Houston for a week over the offseason to kind of train together, and then it was also just kind of a vacation, have some fun, kind of bonding, stuff like that. But I think that unit, there were questions about how well it would mesh because we kind of knew the talent was there. Jaylen Reed, returning starter, was very solid last year. KJ Winston, obviously with the offseason hype. AJ Harris, former 5-star, coming in from Georgia. Obviously, you have big expectations on him. Kimber, a 4-year player at Florida who was, started for them last couple of seasons. So a lot of experience coming in from an SEC program. You obviously feel pretty good about what you have there. So I think it was, the talent was always there. I shouldn't leave out Zaki Wheatley because, he's certainly got a lot of skills that he brings to the room as well. 3-time offseason takeaway king for Penn State. So just a knack for the ball. And Franklin called him the most improved player over the offseason for Penn State. So definitely just a lot of talent in that room. I think the biggest question was, you do have some moving pieces. You do have a new defensive coordinator. How can you, put these pieces together? How can you get them to mesh? And I think for a week 1 game where, it was their first time playing together with that group, in an actual game. I thought it went really well for them. Obviously, you see the statistics, you see the awards that came in for KJ Winston. So I thought it was really impressive. They obviously played a lot better than I think I or anyone else expected. And yeah, I mean, if they continue to play like that, which I don't see why they wouldn't, I think they really can be a strength of the team.
What did you notice from Tom Allen's defense overall that looked familiar? Because obviously this was a very good defense last season. What did you see that looked different to you in a way that you found interesting?
Yeah. I mean, you have the two defensive ends that are obviously switching out now. You go from Adisa Isaac and Chop Robinson to now Denai Dennis Sutton, Abdul Carter. So obviously you're changing there, but I still saw kind of some of the same stuff where, really fast get off from those guys, which is something, last year that Isaac and Robinson were praised for. So kind of similar traits, I would say, similar skill sets. They were somewhat effective. I think the team only had 2 sacks, which is a little bit less, I think, than what we saw last year. So I think in terms of aggressiveness, Penn State was just less aggressive in terms of, getting to the quarterback, getting tackles for loss, things like that. I mean, that's what Manny Diaz was known for. And you see even his first game at Duke, they set like a program record for first half sacks, I believe with 5. So that's kind of just a Manny Diaz thing. He also liked to bring defensive backs a lot on blitzes. I don't think Tom Allen is nearly as aggressive, but what I did notice, what stood out to me, I think, just going back to the safeties was specifically Reed and Winston were just kind of all over the place, flying around to the ball, making plays, whether, forcing fumbles, whatever it was. They were the 2 team leaders in tackles this game. So I think the safeties, the defensive backs as a whole, really play a bigger role in the defense under Tom Allen. I think they're a little bit less aggressive and a little bit more conservative than they were with Manny Diaz. But, at the end of the day, pretty much the same result, still both very effective defenses, even if they're a little bit different styles.
Yeah, the safeties were definitely very noticeable. Joel, I want to get into the atmosphere a little bit. Obviously, it was a big game. Morgantown was delivered, I think, before the game. I think the rain delay maybe took a little steam out of them, but regardless, it was I think what you like to see in an early season game. There's hype, there's excitement. Penn State was in a very prominent TV slot. They do not play another Power 4 opponent in the non-conference portion of the schedule until Syracuse in 2027 and 2028. We got into this conversation a little bit last week in the context of Pitt, West Virginia, these old Eastern Independent rivals. But I guess we could broaden the scope here a little bit. Do you think it's a mistake to be going so dark in terms of interesting, compelling early season games, especially against programs that you are ostensibly better than? I mean, I understand why there'd be a hesitance to go out and like face Georgia on the road or go to Bama like they did in 2011. Those are great programs. They even throw Auburn a few years ago where James Franklin has expressed skepticism about that. But I look at, maybe those teams that are rung down, Pitt and West Virginia are in that category, but I think there's a lot of other teams that could check that box as well. Do you think it's a mistake to just not, challenge yourself in that way? Because I think, especially from a prominence standpoint, it helped Penn State to be in the big noon slot, to have lots of people watching that game, to be a kind of a focal point, especially as that, most of the other big games of the weekend until, Sunday and Monday night, they were not very good at all.
Yeah, I mean, that just felt kind of like a massive game with all the buzz surrounding it. Obviously, you have the big noon kickoff, the crews there on site. You had Pat McAfee doing the live show on Friday night with a huge crowd in attendance for that. There was a Machine Gun Kelly concert the morning before the game. So it just felt like West Virginia was kind of pulling out all the stops for the matchup. And yeah, it definitely felt like a huge deal, in the lead up. And even just kind of, from looking in from the outside, it felt like there was still a lot of animosity for two teams that prior to this little home and away series, prior to that hadn't played for 32 years or whatever. And it still felt like an intense, regional rivalry. It felt like there was genuine hatred between the fan bases, which you can, argue whether that's a good or bad thing, I guess. But I think those kind of regional matchups are good for Penn State. And I understand the argument. I understand both sides of the argument where, if you win that game, if you're Penn State and you win that game, right, it's kind of expected. You're not really going to get praised for beating a team that you're however many point favorites against. And then if you lose, it can obviously have big implications on your season, knock you down in the rankings, potentially take you out of the playoff picture, things like that. There is some risk involved for Penn State, but I don't think you should be scared to be scheduling these games against these regional opponents. I think you look at Penn State's history, they have a very rich history against a lot of the teams in the region, whether it's West Virginia, whether it's Pitt, whether it's Syracuse, Maryland, schools like that are, within basically driving range for the fans. And I think those are good. And again, they're not, traveling across the country like, the Auburn game or anything like that, where, you're asking the team to make a big travel, or it's not like, going to a different time zone or anything like that with all the challenges that can come with that. And again, if you're staying local, you can bring the fans along. They're within driving range for the most part. They can kind of show up, check out these new schools. I would love for Penn State to put, Virginia Tech back on the schedule. Obviously, they had that series canceled because of COVID, but I feel like those games would be really interesting for the fans. And again, from just the national media perspective, get some eyeballs on Penn State, because I think that Penn State West Virginia game had a lot of viewers on Saturday, and Penn State obviously played a great game, covered the spread convincingly. So they obviously outperformed what most people were expecting. And they did so on a big stage. That's how you kind of get more attention on the program. You can argue whether that's good or bad. Maybe Franklin doesn't want that much attention on his program, that many eyeballs. But again, for the program as a whole, it just puts you kind of more into the spotlight. It allows you to kind of win those quote unquote bigger matchups, because when again, Penn State, West Virginia, if this was week 5, week 6, that's not a big matchup. But when it's week 1 and, all the other schools are playing FCS schools or, MAC schools or whatever, Penn State, West Virginia is a big deal. So it kind of does give you that opportunity to get just more eyeballs on the program, which can help, from media exposure. It can help build the brand. It can help with recruiting. So I do think there are a lot of benefits to doing it. And again, I do understand the other side of the argument, but personally, I just would like to see more of these types of matchups in the future.
Yeah, think if you're like a sophomore at Penn State, this is the last big non-conference matchup you're going to see. And I think that's kind of a bummer. If you're a student, you kind of want to get that buzz going early in the season. There was always a criticism. I would see people say, well, if Penn State played Pitt, that game would be on ESPN Plus back in the day when that was still a thing. No one would watch it. It'd be at noon. And I think we've seen over the last, half dozen years that that's not true at all. Penn State in 2018 was primetime ABC when they played Pitt. I think they were ABC when they played Pitt at home in 2019. Then you go, West Virginia the last 2 years, you had primetime NBC, the first NBC game. It was the first game NBC was going to broadcast other than a Notre Dame game in eons. And then this year you have Big Noon Saturday. There's, I think, a hunger for these types of games, especially like you said early in the season. So, I don't think that excuse that people used for many years holds water, but I do also think it's bigger than just rivalries too. I'm not arguing just for these rivalries. I think, it'd be great to see you go face a team like NC State, right? Or like you said, Virginia Tech, some of these proximity ACC schools, Boston College. When's the last time you played them other than in the Pinstripe Bowl at Yankee Stadium the one year? That'd be great with Bill O'Brien. They just got a big win this week. So, I think you can throw some of those teams into that conversation as well. But, we can save the schedule talk for the offseason otherwise, because that's usually better offseason fodder than it is in season. I'm going to wrap it up on this, Joel. Big Ten went 17-1 this week. So Penn State didn't really make up any ground on anyone really in terms of the playoff race. Who is looking like, the biggest threat to Penn State's playoff path outside of what I think people are considering the givens of Ohio State, Oregon, then maybe Michigan?
Within the Big Ten, it was a lot of kind of blowouts. Again, you mentioned the only loss, Minnesota loses to North Carolina, but there were, a lot of blowouts. I thought Iowa was actually interesting, just because they actually scored points.
I had them written down for exactly that reason. It wasn't that they won; it was that they did score some points.
Right. Yeah. You could, obviously quality of opponent, not exactly up there. But 40 points for Iowa, a pretty big deal. They crossed that 25 point, the Ferentz line, as some are calling it. And I think I saw they had 3 passing touchdowns, which was like tied for what they had all of last season. So definitely interesting to see what Iowa's doing there. The defense again was great as always. They posted a shutout. And if Iowa, and people have been saying this for the last few years, if Iowa had even just, a decent offense, right, or even just a bad offense, as opposed to, the worst offense in football, right? If they had even just a bad or average offense, they would be, a top 15, top 10 level team. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing this year. I know they bring a lot back on defense. I think they're pretty high up there in returning production. And then if their offense is actually able to continue this momentum, again, not the greatest opponent there, so not like a true test of what the offense can do. We'll see what happens once they get more into conference play. But if I was able to maintain, even just the 25 points per game, even, I think they could really be a threat. They don't, play Penn State in the regular season, but potentially a dark horse there that Penn State might have to worry about in terms of just making it into the playoffs. Iowa, again, a pretty easy schedule as well. So I think Iowa's favored in like 11 of 12 games. So I think Iowa, if the playoff committee is thinking about, how many teams they want to bring in per conference and things like that, and you have maybe a 10-2 Penn State, 11-1 Iowa, and they're pretty similar in the rankings, that's where it might come into play, even though Penn State doesn't play them directly, or even potentially a Big Ten championship game appearance. Iowa might be able to steal away from Penn State if they have the better record. So I think that's definitely something that stood out to me. Again, just because, 40 points for Iowa is kind of mind-boggling, just given what they've done in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and then obviously you have the USC big win over LSU. I didn't think they looked great in that game. I think they looked just a little bit better than LSU, which always seems to kind of finish stronger than it starts. So I'm still not sure exactly what to make of USC quite yet. Rutgers looks good. I think Nebraska is going to be the big thing to watch this week with Colorado. Can they stand up to that test? Joel, thanks for we had a couple other topics written down, but I think this was a great discussion, so maybe we'll hit them later on. Thanks for joining me. Stay tuned. Joel will be doing a video after the game on Saturday, recapping everything that happens. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel. If you like this video, please like it. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. And also, stay tuned for the rest of the week. We're going to have a lot more Steelers content in the lead up to week 1 against the Atlanta Falcons, the North Shore Drive on Friday with Christopher Carter. Then I will be back on Sunday after the game to do my live stream with Paul Zeiss, reacting to everything we see down in Georgia. So thanks for stopping by, everyone. We will talk to you again next week.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.